Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we're talking about the similarities between Fulgrim and Sanguinius. How perhaps the Emperor's original plan was very different indeed. General spoiler warning to begin, as today we will be referencing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe. So you have been warned, and with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, earlier this week we discussed Fulgrim's meeting with Eldrad Ulfran during the Great Crusade. How it was a great example of the diplomatic and spokesman abilities that defined the early days of the Third Legion. And over the past few months, it's really this and the other qualities of Fulgrim that have had me wondering on what his original role was supposed to be. How Fulgrim was quite possibly intended to be the symbol of the Imperium, the figurehead beneath the Emperor. Now, we know if there was one, it instead came to be Horus Lupercal, or arguably Sanguinius. But these two Primarchs each had defining factors arise in their life that maybe led to that, or at least most definitely contributed towards it. For Horus, he landed upon Cophonia, a world and system so close to Terra, it's quite possible it never lost contact with the Sol system at all. Horus as such was found first, and had the blessing of years by the Emperor's side that no other Primarch received. It's indisputable Horus would have benefited beyond greatly for this time, perhaps becoming the only Primarch in truth to reach their full potential. And of course here for this discussion, we're going with the logic that the Emperor never intended the scattering. Horus's charisma is legendary. It's hard to believe he was never not intended to be first among equals. But maybe he always was, the position of War Master, not necessarily the same as symbol of the Imperium, the voice of the Emperor. Horus is loved as a brother, as a warrior, but he doesn't have the kind of beauty about him of a Fulgrim or Sanguinius. For Sanguinius, he of course had his wings. Now, we've never really received a proper answer on if they were intended or not, but minor spoiler warning for the Siege of Terra here. Again, minor spoiler warning. In a brief glimpse of the Emperor and Sanguinius' reunion, it certainly seemed to me that the Emperor was not expecting to see Sanguinius with the wings, and he was most definitely factoring this development in. For all the anti-religion of the Imperial truth, when you've got a literal demigod angel leading the way, it's hard for him not to be seen as the symbol, or at least a symbol. And of course with his sacrifice, the worship of the Emperor as a god that followed, there was no way Sanguinius wasn't going to be revered in the future Imperium to come. However, regardless of that, if we take away those wings and look at Sanguinius as he was without them, we still have that striking beauty of his appearance, that melodic charming quality of his voice. In many ways very similar to Fulgrim. One of the brief glimpses of them together in A Thousand Suns really hammers that home. Two giant figures emerged from the volcano, walking side by side like old friends. Ahriman's heartbeat spiked at the sight of them. The first a gloriously caparisoned warrior in armour of gold and purple, with flaring shoulder guards and a billowing cape of scarlet and gold. His hair was brilliant white, bound at his temples by a band of silver, and his face was one of perfect symmetry, like divinely proportioned Euclidean geometry. The second figure wore armour of deepest crimson, the colour vital and urgent. Wings of dappled black and white rustled at his back, the feathers hung with fine loops of silver wire and mother of pearl. Hair of deepest black framed a face that was pale and classically shaped, like one of the thousands of marble likenesses that garrisoned the Imperial Palace of Terror. Yet this was no lifeless rendering of long-dead luminary. This was a living, breathing angel made flesh, whose countenance was the most beauteous in existence. Now, yes, I know, Sanguinius is described with black hair here, and feeling a little bit more like Asterath than your usual Sanguinius. But ignoring that, you really do feel the striking similarities between the two Primarchs. Even in the infamous Jagatai Fulgrim encounter in Scars, their similarities again are noted. Fulgrim and the Angel looked similar in some ways. They had the same sculptural faces, the same flamboyant armour. And in knowing the Emperor intentionally overlapped traits and roles into the Primarchs, is it just possible Fulgrim and Sanguinius were intended to overlap in this way, in regards to being a possible voice of the Emperor, a symbol for the Imperium? I think it just could be. Even their differing personalities would make sense in that regard. The more regal Fulgrim and the more down-to-earth Sanguinius. Two sides of the same coin. There's a reason the Emperor chose the golden glorious Emperor of mankind aspect to portray to the wider galaxy. And though all the suns resemble him in ways, it's undoubtedly Fulgrim and Sanguinius who have that glorious aspect to them. That breathtaking quality. Now Lorgar is called the Golden One, and said to resemble the Emperor the most facially, but Lorgar is covered in golden tattooed scripture. He wasn't literally gold, and he was very much the messenger, spreading the word of the Imperial truth. Similar but very different to that statesman, diplomat role played by the original Emperor's children, and thus Fulgrim. And I think that particular talent of Fulgrim's is the second reason I feel he was intended for a far greater role originally. Fulgrim's success and fate was hugely altered by the corruption and tragedy of the Blight in his burgeoning legion, whereas every other Primarch was reunited with legions 1,000 strong. Fulgrim's was crippled, barely in the hundreds. Though he achieved great victories with them, he wasn't able to carve the path he should have. But in that speech he gave to his new legion, he so inspired the Emperor with his words, he was awarded the right to display the Emperor's Aquila. He and his legion alone. It's a bit of a shame in a way, as it's arguably that event that led to Fulgrim focusing so much on perfection, becoming so obsessed to achieve it. However, regardless, it's clear Fulgrim had an extraordinary oratory ability to inspire, above even his brothers. We might not have been able to get to see it much, but nobody else moved the Emperor to give such a prestigious recognition. So for me, in knowing the Emperor always intended to step away at some point in his grand vision, whether it was for the Webway project or after the completion of his great dream, I think there's a definite argument to be made that Fulgrim was the Primarch originally intended to be the voice of the Emperor, if you will, the symbol of him and the Imperium. Alongside the Angel, he is the most visibly breathtaking Primarch. He is innately a ruler, resembling a king of old. His legion intentionally bred from the traditional ruling houses. He is a statesman, a diplomat without peer, who could conduct himself flawlessly in any court of the galaxy. And again, the lone Primarch ever able to move the Emperor himself through speech. Had the scattering not happened, had the Emperor's Children Legion not been decimated, I think it's very likely it was Fulgrim who was intended to be the voice of the Emperor at some point, who possibly was even intended to be the symbol of the Emperor's glorious Great Crusade, his Imperium. Perhaps alongside Sanguinius, perhaps not. Again, it's very possible they were two fail-safes for the similar purpose, as we have seen countless times across the Primarchs, and it's very likely Sanguinius was not supposed to have those wings. It's hard to look past the haughty, above-you attitude of Fulgrim at times, but it's important to remember we're not talking of his relations with the fellow Primarchs here, how they viewed him. We're talking solely of the view of the wider Imperium, how his abilities translate and were intended by the Emperor. And I think this fits extremely well. The Emperor is an emperor for a reason. What a shame it is we don't know how the scattering affected things. We don't know how differently the Primarchs may have been had they been brought up by the Emperor's side. How different they may have been, or how similar. However, one thing's for sure for me, Fulgrim was most definitely intended to play an important role. But as always everyone, what do you think? What do you think was Fulgrim's originally intended role? Why is he so symbolic of the kings of old? Why does he excel in the ways of diplomacy like no other? Was it for a more important role he never got to fulfill? Are those overlapping similarities to Sanguinius important? Were they indeed two sides of a symbolic coin? Fulgrim the unreachable ruler, Sanguinius the more human, again taking away that aspect of his wings. Had the scattering not transpired, how do you feel the fates of the Phoenician and the Angel may have changed? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.